All right, we good? I think so. All right, perfect. All right, well, welcome. Go ahead and start the meeting of the Move I-15 through Temecula Regional Task Force Committee. Welcome, everyone. Let's go ahead and do the roll call. Start with Murrieta. I know they're not able to make it today. They don't have any representatives here. Wildemar, City of Wildemar. We do. Oh, we got there you are. All right. Well, welcome. Appreciate it. Sorry about the scheduling conflict. City of Wildemar. Yes. All right. And if you wouldn't mind for the audience and folks here, just state your name if they can't read it too, just for the record. We've got City of Lake Elsinore.
Bob McGee and Grant Yates with Great City of Lake Elsinore.
All right, perfect. City of Menifee.
Jonathan Smith, City of Menifee.
All right. Temecula, we've got myself, Matt Ron. We've got our mayor, Mike Nagar. City manager, Aaron Adams. Greg Butler, our assistant city manager, public works director in the room as well. Pat. Anyone else? Am I missing? And City of Canyon Lake. All right. All right, welcome. Pechanga.
Yep, Jared Manoa, Pechanga Development Corporation, actually the president, not the vice president.
Oh, all right, we'll get that fixed. Paula. Anyone from Paula here today? I didn't think so. Let's see, Congressman Calvert's office. All right, Senator Stone's office.
Daryl Connerton with Senator Stone's office.
Welcome, Daryl. Assemblywoman Waldron.
Yeah, Christy McDougall with Assemblywoman Marie Waldron.
All right. Let's see. Riverside County Board of Supervisors, 3rd District. All right, welcome. The RCTC. Oh, do we have a?
Chris, in the back, do we have the call-in line set up? Is anyone called in?
Yes, I'm going to try to unmute them right now.
Thank you.
All right. That's what I thought. All right, we'll get back to them. How about WRCOG? They're going to call in as well. Okay. Department of Transportation, County Riverside. Oh, we've got Caltrans. No, you guys are Caltrans. I recognize you. SCAG. Anyone from SCAG? Yes. Nancy Lowe with SCAG. All right, welcome. Okay, now we're Caltrans District 8.
Tom Ainsworth?
And District 11?
No, we're all District 8. District 8.
Oh, all right. All District 8. All right, who else we got from District 8?
Traffic Operations.
Imad Makar, Project Management.
All right, welcome. Thank you. Sandag. Anyone from Sandag? No. I saw someone from Highway Patrol here. There you are.
Temecula CHP.
All right. And Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton.
Chad Pelikai.
Oh, there you are. Welcome back. And let's get back to RCTC, WRCOG on the phone, hopefully. She is on the line listening. I'm trying to get her voice working. Oh, all right. Well. That's okay. We will get her on shortly. Let's go ahead and start. Do we have any public comment here today? Did we? No? No speaker slips? All right. Well, then we'll dispense with the reading there. Let's go ahead and get started with the committee business. The first item we have today is to hear from our transportation strategist, Tom Skanke, insights on transportation funding.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Ron. Tom Skanke has been serving as a transportation strategist to the city of Temecula for several months now. And during the course of several meetings, Tom had enlightened us on some of the things that have been successful to other regions in securing transportation funding through the federal government. We thought it would be beneficial to have him make similar presentations and insightful information to the balance of the task force. That's why you invited him to speak today. So, Tom?
Thank you, Greg, and members of the committee. I now know why you all picked a 4 o'clock meeting time. It's to keep me here for dinner, because I just saw all the traffic on the I-15 North, so I'm accepting dinner restaurant recommendations following the meeting. First of all, it's great for me to be here today because I've spent the better part of 30 years in the transportation strategy arena. Most of my work has been in the West. I've done a lot of work with Caltrans District 8 over the years, RCTC, Sandbag. I served on the State Board of Transportation for the state of Nevada for 4 years. I was appointed by Governor Brian Sandoval. And I also served a 3-year term that was supposed to be 8 months on the National Surface Transportation Policy and Revenue Study Commission. I was appointed by the Senate Majority Leader to be one of 12 members of that commission. And we made recommendations to Congress in our report of how you can transform and fund the surface transportation in the United States. It was the first commission of its kind since the Clay Commission from the Eisenhower administration. So I've been in and around transportation policy and funding strategies for almost my entire professional career. About 3 weeks ago, I think it was, or maybe a month now, I was in a meeting with Greg and Aaron and Pat and Betsy, and we were talking about how other regions around the country have been successful in securing transportation funding, and they thought it might be a good idea for me to share with you some of those insights and some of those thoughts. In 2009, earmarks went away, and that's when the transportation funding world really changed. And what happened at that time was, if you'll recall, prior to that, members of Congress and your U.S. senators got to mark funds in the transportation bill for special projects in their district. In my opinion, having earmarks go away really hurt communities like you all represent. And for this reason, you're members of Congress and you all know better where to spend transportation dollars than people that have probably never been to Riverside County, let alone your respective cities. And what happened was all of that was then directed back to Washington, D.C., and now we have a competitive grant process. During the Obama administration, it was Tiger grants, and now in the Trump administration, it's infra grants. There's a very limited amount of financial resources that are available today in the grant process. I'm not going to get into all the funding formulas and how money transfers from the federal government to the states, to the metropolitan planning organizations, to the RTPAs, to the cities. What I want to share with you is how other regions around the country have been successful in securing those grants and also creating strategies around how more dollars can flow. Because there is a very finite amount of money available. So in this particular round of the infra grant process, it's around $850 million that's available. And what does that mean to you? It sounds like a lot of money, and it's really not, because there's a $3 trillion shortage in the Highway Trust Fund. And if you look at the buying power today of the 18.4-cent fuel tax that has not been raised, by the way, I'm not advocating for that, I'm just saying that the last time it was raised was in 1993. The buying power of that fuel tax today is about 8 cents when you add in the cost of inflation and the cost of projects. So if you look at regions around the country that have been successful and why they're successful, it's because they've identified that their competition is not themselves or other cities that are in their community or other counties that are in their state. It really is them against the rest of the country. So as I've said to my friends at RCTC, our competition is not necessarily the state of California. It's Minneapolis, it's Chicago, it's Dallas, it's Houston, it's Miami, it's New York. And in our case here in Riverside County, we do compete with LA, we do compete with San Francisco and San Diego. And normally how these grants are funded is, I can tell you that the I-95 corridor that goes from Maine to Florida always gets funding. Whether it was a Tiger grant, whether it was a Corridors of the Future designation and funding, or whether it has been in the infra grant process. And the reason why is their philosophy, and has been for the last 25 to 30 years, is any dollar that gets appropriated on the I-95 corridor, whether it's in Massachusetts, Maine, or North Carolina, is a success for them. And so they actually go in as a corridor, and they lobby Congress and the DOT for dollars for the 95 corridor. Fast forward, about 10 years after the 95 corridor was created, the Ports to Plains corridor in the Midwest was created. They took the same framework and they said, well, if the 95 corridor can be successful in this process by, at that time, securing more earmarks and securing more transportation funding in the authorization bills, we're going to use the same strategy. And that strategy is any dollar that goes on the I-35 corridor is a dollar that benefits the entire region. And as I was sharing this with Aaron and his team, I've taken this same concept and I've suggested this to other regions around the country. We created the I-15 Corridor Coalition when we were applying for a, just slipped my head. It's the first sign of senility, isn't it? Corridors of the Future program. And we brought Caltrans and we brought NDOT, ADOT, and UDOT together. And that whole group submitted a grant, and they got a grant for the 3 bridges in Arizona. Now, I-15 through Arizona is about 17 miles. And it was interesting, those 4 states came together as DOTs, and the state of California took the lead on writing the grant with NDOT in Nevada. We secured a grant because that particular 17 miles in Arizona is not that significant or important to the state of Nevada. But those 3 bridges going across the gorge are extremely important to goods movement coming out of the ports of LA and Long Beach. If those bridges go out, that stops goods movement out of Southern California. So the 4 states made that particular project the #1 project in their Corridor of the Future program. They then, as a group, funded a project in Utah, and then they've come back and they did a project, they supported a project on I-15 in San Bernardino County and a small project in Nevada. The reason why I share this with you is because it is extremely important in this competitive environment today for regions to work together as closely as possible. So if you look at the Riverside County region, you may think that your competition could be Palm Springs, or it might be Corona, or it might be Paris or Moreno Valley. It's not. Our competition here in Riverside County is all of the other major metros and all of the other counties. It's all the major metros in the United States, because the pot of money is so small, and the amount of money that the trust fund generates and the amount that California gets back is so small. And it's because of the lack of funding and the fact that there just isn't enough revenue to go around. So as you look at transportation strategies along the I-15 corridor, the more of you that can come together, which I think it's powerful to have a group like this, the more of you that can come together and work in a regional cooperative effort, the more successful you will be in securing grants and securing additional programmatic funding from the federal government. We used to have a lot more money in the Surface Transportation Trust Fund. We just don't have it. The country has grown, and the demand is high, and the financial resources are low. I was just telling Greg, or maybe it was you, Pat, people have high hopes for a new transportation bill and an infrastructure bill. They're going to have to borrow the money somewhere to fund that bill. And I tell people all the time in the transportation space, just because they're talking about a surface transportation bill, I recommend don't get your hopes very high, because no one's talking about where the revenue is going to come from to fund that. So you have to be very strategic in how you go after these efforts. You have to be very, very cooperative in how you do it. And the more you can come together, again, I cannot say this enough, the more you can come together in regional cooperation. And prioritize your projects, which is what RCTC does and we all do as communities, but figure out a way that you can prioritize those projects that make regional and national significance. So like the I-15 corridor is part of the national or the interstate highway system. Here's a tip. When you have the interstate highway shield on a road, that is the #1 priority at the federal government level. That is part of the Eisenhower Interstate Highway System. The next level down is the National Highway System. The next level down is then your state highway system and local streets and roads. So when you have a shield on a road through your community, that gives you a competitive advantage. And that competitive advantage is it's part of the Eisenhower Interstate Highway System. So you can use that to your strategic advantage as you start looking at grant opportunities. What you all have done recently with the grant process by bringing as many people in under the tent is a powerful thing for you to do. But the more you can work collectively, the more successful you will be in this very competitive environment with a limited amount of resources. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, or you can tell me to get out, and that way I can beat the traffic. I'm still going to stay for dinner, so if you have recommendations, I'd be happy to take those. But I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
All right, thank you, Tom. Anybody have questions?
Well, there's got to be questions.
Come on. Mike.
I'll kick it off. First of all, Tom, you've been a very, very good help to the city of Temecula as we've put together a package for the Infra grant. I was just whispering over here to Bob McGee, who's my compatriot on RCTC, that we're in competition, so to speak, not directly, I guess indirectly, with RCTC to get those funds. A couple of questions. Maybe you can speak to that grant in general. Speak to the grant as it relates between our relationship and RCTC, how that may be viewed when the grant funds are given out. And in general, what are our chances across the United States? And not to add it to it, but I think we're asking for $50 million, and I'm not certain what RCTC is asking for. I forget right now, but I think it's over $100 million, if I recall. Do you recall, Bob, at all? I do. Okay. Anyway, so I gave you there a big package, and I think that may stimulate a lot of the discussion.
So is there an easy question in that?
Oh, I can tell you where to go to dinner. Okay, that's the easy
Why don't we start with that? That might be the best place to start. So, as I've told your team here in Temecula, I actually don't think those two projects are mutually exclusive. I think that the more this region can bring in the grant process and the more you can work together, the better. I don't look at that as competition, primarily because while you do compete, and that's the process, Riverside County is the workforce for almost all of Southern California. You are where people live, and you also are where people work. But a lot of people here commute to other parts of Southern California for work. And that's my point about the grant process. People that are making these decisions in Washington, D.C. have never been here. They have no idea the traffic that is generated in Southern California, because or in this region. What they see on television is traffic on the 405, but they don't see the traffic on the 15 or the 91 or the 60 or the 215 or the French Valley Parkway or any of these interchanges, because that's not a headline. What's a headline, what you see on holiday weekends, is two things, particularly Thanksgiving. They always show the picture of the red lights on the 405 with everyone leaving everyone leaving Los Angeles on Wednesday afternoon going somewhere for Thanksgiving. That's the national news, okay? So as far as the process goes, and I don't do prognostications, I'm never right, but in my opinion, if anyone at the US DOT is listening today, I think both of those grants should be funded. In fact, if I had to choose of any projects in the state of California, in my opinion, again, I don't have a vote, the 91 and the 15 in this region are critical lifelines. If you remember what the Eisenhower Interstate Highway System was originally created for, it was to mobilize the military in the event of a national emergency. On my drive here today, there is no way any of these military installations could have gotten up the 405. I mean, up the 15. They certainly can't move on the 405, but they couldn't move on the 15. So, again, that's where that regional cooperation, there should be complementary, I would say, communication to those types of things. And again, I think both of those projects should be funded. That's just my opinion. The second part of your question, what do I think the chances are? There's $850 million in this round of infra grants, and I've been told that there's close to $1 trillion worth of requests. And $850 million is not even $1 billion, because you've got transit requests, you've got highway requests, interchanges. Places like my hometown of Sioux Falls, South Dakota is probably requesting $200,000 or $1 million for something. And every community in the country that applied is competing for an $850 million pot of money. And I wouldn't want to be on that selection committee. The amount of influence peddling, as I would say, that is going on to get that money, because we don't know what the next round is going to be. And everyone is competing for a very small pot of money. So I actually don't know what anyone's chances are of getting grants. I will bet you all $1 today, and I'll cover it. And Aaron, I'll give you, let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. I'll give you $20 today. I'll bet you all $1 that the I-95 corridor gets a project, and the I-35 corridor gets a project funded. And it's because they go in as 17 or 19 states for the I-95 corridor, and they go in as a region for the I-35 corridor. And that's power. I mean, think about it. 19 states on the I-95 corridor, it's either 19 or 17. 17 states in the I-95 corridor, that's 34 U.S. senators. That's over 100 members of Congress. That's influence. Now, you've got you have a very powerful congressman here. Fortunately for you, Congressman Calvert gets it. He is an appropriator, and he has been great. I've worked with Congressman Calvert for 17, 18 years. Before that, I worked with Congressman Lewis. They understood this region, and they understood the importance of working together. I'm not certain that spirit of cooperation is in Washington today, but I can tell you that your member of Congress does a really good job and understand what needs to happen here. But he's one member out of the 53 members of Congress here in the state of California. So I would suggest in this process, the more of you that can support it all, because I don't think either one of the, again, I don't think these grants are mutually exclusive. In transportation funding and in transportation solutions, when you fix this interchange, the problem just moves down the road and moves down the road. And you may think that that's really bad for your community, but then you have to strategically plan for what that is. And you've got to look at the systemic connectivity of what the impacts are along the entire corridor. For example, the 3 bridges over the gorge in the state of Arizona. The ports of LA and Long Beach in Southern California got the importance of that and led the charge. That's the type of thinking. Did I answer your question at all, or did I just really do a good job of ducking it?
No, you really took it down a path I wanted to go, and maybe a little bit of follow-up is who put that 17-state coalition together? I mean, how do we put that together ourselves? And certainly the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach are major shipping ports, and a lot of that's coming to the Inland Empire. I mean, how do we put together such a coalition that's very tight and does what you're suggesting?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And the way that they have done it on the East Coast and in the Midwest is it took a group of people, primarily the private sector, working with elected officials. And there's nothing better than getting private sector people involved who understand logistics. So they got the trucking companies, they got the railroad companies, logistics companies, all the warehousing companies. They got their state elected officials, the local elected officials. They brought everyone into a room and they said, okay, it's either going to be us against you or us against all of them. And they shared the concept. And they created literally a framework for the region. And their philosophy was, we all can go in and lobby for a project. But the heading of the project needs to be the I-95 coalition. And that's who makes the request. Now, it may come from Massachusetts DOT, and it may come from New Jersey DOT, but they've always got the corridor in mind. And when they go lobby, their whole philosophy is, hey, whether it's New Jersey or North Carolina, as long as the money comes to the 95 corridor, as long as we get a corridor of the future designation, as long as we are a high priority corridor, as long as when you're funding borders and corridors in the transportation surface transportation bill, we get funding. And they created the sense of urgency, they created the sense of need, they created the messaging campaign, and it's been very, very successful. I mean, I'll sit here and pat myself on the back. I've got kind of a bad shoulder on this side, but we did, in 1991, Congressman Lewis and Senator Reed from Nevada got $60 million for the interchange at I-40 and I-15 in Barstow. It was an earmark, okay? The good old days of working in the transportation world. That set off an entire strategy of working together between two states, two DOTs, and two members of our Congress. And here's what that partnership looked like. Nevada gave $10 million, added the $10 million to the $59 million we got in an earmark. Caltrans couldn't move the permitting or the project fast enough, so we signed a bi-state agreement between Caltrans and NDOT put the contract out for the design and the construction. And the environmental was done, and it was an NDOT project in the state of California. And that happened time and time again over the last 25 years. It's that type of creativity and that type of willingness to step over the border and say, hey, let's try this. And so you just really have to be creative. You have to really get outside, a little bit outside of your comfort zone. Easy for me to say that, I'm not an elected official, but there are ways to do that, and there are ways to work through the process. I'm not suggesting that you try to go around NEPA or CEQA or any of those things, but there are ways that you can streamline and partner with people if you just get creative and step outside the boundary and say to anyone, is this possible to try this? And anyone that's solution-based will really take a look at, yeah, maybe we can. We did the same thing with the widening of I-15 from Victorville to Barstow. The same thing on the DeVore interchange. It just took a little creativity and a lot of people to come together to work in regional cooperation and say, these are priority projects. And that's really how they did it. And I can tell you, I have seen it for the last 30 years in this industry. The more you work together, your neighbor's not your enemy. Your neighbor is your friend. And the more you can work with your neighbor, unless they put up a 30-foot concrete wall without a building permit, but in most parts, if you just think of it kind of from that point of view, that the next city on the freeway is not your enemy, how do you bring that next city on the freeway or on that road into this kind of global framework of thinking? Because, again, this will be the last time I say this. Your competition is not each other. Your competition are the big metros in this country. And the big metros get the money. And if you act like a big metro, if Riverside County as a whole collectively acts as a big metro, it's a little difficult to say no to the big metros. My last piece of advice on that is raise your visibility of importance. Every road in this community, and I spend a lot of time in Southern California, every road in this particular region is congested. It just is. I mean, LA has bad traffic as well. They have a lot of people, but so do you. And they get the coverage, and you don't. And when you get coverage, people pay attention to that. And you just have to think strategically. And it is difficult because we're focused on what's happening in our towns. But if you want to compete with Dallas and Chicago and Houston, I guarantee you there's a meeting going on like this today in those big cities saying, how do we get money from LA? How do we get money from San Francisco? And that's how you have to think. You've got a lot, there's what's the old, there's strength in numbers, but there's power in collaboration. And the more you think that way, the more successful you'll be on the federal level. Because I promise you, they're doing it all over the country. And they're winning. By the way, California is a donor state, right? So you give more than you get back. Nevada was, I'm sorry, you're a donor state. Nevada was a donor state. We got more back than what we gave. And that's just pure formula. So you have to out-strategize the formula and figure out how you best play in that space.
Thank you.
All right, any others? Yes.
I hear what you're saying, and it makes perfect sense, but that sounds like that we need then some outside help besides us. You said we're all busy in our own cities, and this is bringing us together, but we still need somebody like you that knows how to bring LA in or San Diego in or some of these other people in to give us the power. I don't know that this unit here has the power to do that.
So I'm available.
Okay, that's there are companies that do that. That's kind of what I'm asking.
I'm having fun. You know what? You all don't know me. I'm probably funny to myself and not to others. There is a framework that you can that I have used in other regions that work. I'm not here hawking business today. I'm here to help you and understand like what that process is and what that looks like. But we've done it, and we've done it a lot. And there's lots of messages that you can create. By the way, the jobs message is worn out. It's not working, just for the record. So if you say that this project's going to create a lot of jobs, the public doesn't believe it anymore. And it's not government's job to create jobs. It's government job to protect the public, right? And that's what you all do every day. Whether that's a zoning matter or it's a stop sign or whatever you deal with in your respective communities. But you can create a strategic framework of how you can become more competitive in that space. It's not an easy task, but the regions that have done it, like Central Florida, Memphis, Connecticut, Chicago, Seattle, they've been extremely successful. And it's the power of it is everyone comes around the table. Now, San Diego's a partner, LA is a partner, but they have their own issues. Again, my professional advice is the more Riverside County and your communities can work together in that collaborative effort, and I'm going to be blunt, just to create the effect of what I mean by that. It's not someone going to the meeting and saying, well, why does that person always get that and we don't get that? If you work together in a collaborative effort and you start strategically planning what those connection points are and how this all plays into a regional framework, then everybody gets what they want, and then the problems start getting fixed. And that's the thought process of creating a framework. The second part of that is then making sure that everyone, the only example I can get is make sure everyone reads the Bible and they stick to it, so that When processes and projects are moving forward, it becomes a project of regional significance. I give you an example. If you look at what Central Florida did in 1992, and Aaron, I'll send you a copy, or Greg, I'll send you a copy of the framework, and you can distribute it. 25 years later, it is still the gospel in that region of how they do planning and how they do transportation planning and how they do their strategies. They still use that. That's the gospel to them. So there are lots of people out there that do that, but you really have to have strong leadership and a willingness to make it happen. And candidly, I've spent a lot of time in Riverside County. I think your county and your region is ready to have that type of strategic conversation. Because I don't think you guys get treated fairly when it comes to funding formulas, primarily because they don't know where you are, what you do, and what you generate.
Any others? Well, it's a good segue, I think, to our next topic area, which is the infra grant update. I'll talk a little bit about some of the activity we've done and have Aaron and Greg and others chime in as well, what the status is. But, real quickly, Aaron and I were just back in D.C., a couple of weeks ago now. I just got to say, he had what has to be one of the most miserable travel experiences I ever heard of. And he literally had his dad's suit. His dad coincidentally was in Washington that same weekend, and he had no bags, arrives Sunday morning at 3 a.m. for a Monday meeting we had, and he's literally like the homeless guy in Washington, D.C., walking around with his dad's suit and a paper bag. Fortunately, everything worked out, but God love our city manager. My flight was not as ridiculously horrible until I got on the same plane with him going back, and then it all fell apart again. So I kind of feel like he is just absolutely cursed when it comes to travel. So thanks for that, Aaron. But look, we did our job. We talked, met with the right folks. Our lobbyist brought us into the door. I will say from Congressman Calvert's perspective, there was an easy conversation to be had. He understood the issue, and he agreed that this is a top priority in the region, and nationally as well. So that wasn't the challenging conversation. I'll say the same for our senators' offices as well. So that really wasn't the issue. When we got to meet with transportation, that's, I think, where it became a little bit more challenging, because you have, new leadership in transportation. The folks we met with, they felt a little bit like they were still trying to figure out what their job was. When you walk in and say Temecula, they're Temecula who? And so we did. We had to tell our story, and I do have to say, probably our most compelling parts of that story came from, the letters of support from our regional partners in cities, from tribal governments, and then the one that, caught, considerable attention was what you were referring to earlier, the letter from Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton. That certainly generated a lot of interest, and then Customs and Border Patrol as well. And when we told that story, the conversation we had was, arguably when we laid it all out there and we said, look, this has national security issues, this has border protection issues, this has, all sorts of, commerce, implications nationally for a freeway system that goes all the way to Canada. And we said, arguably, you're not going to find another freeway system that can check off those kind of boxes here, advocating for, this kind of funding. And at the end of the conversation, they were all nodding their heads saying yes. And so I think we did as noble a job as possible. But, my question, Tom, going back to you earlier is so what moves the needle the most? It was us, carrying that message forward. They appreciated all the letters and the support, and I think the regional partnership that has been created. But what moves the needle the most for these folks? And, by the time these applications hit the secretary's desk, what is she looking at that, influences her decision?
So the process, as I understand it, and I have not done infra, I did Tiger, lots of Tiger grants. you submit, then staff scores the grant, okay? And then that pile gets whittled down to this pile, and then it gets whittled down one more time based upon scoring and the availability of funds, and then whatever projects get to the secretary's desk. In this particular case, I have heard, and I think you all have as well, that this secretary, as all secretaries for the most part, goes through the final 150 or 200 projects and says, okay, we've got enough money for 20, whatever the number is, and they start picking through and shortlisting just like everyone else. And usually, they pick interstate highway projects and national highway projects and state projects, usually. I don't know how this secretary is making her decisions. And in the past, there has always been a little bit of political influence that goes into these decisions. It is Washington, D.C. after all. And they look, what's the regional impact? Does it reduce congestion? Does it reduce greenhouse gas emissions? Does it do, is it a project of regional and national significance? And that's all determined on different tiers, and they have different people in different departments review these grants so that everyone has input as to the overall viability of the project and the request. That's the way it's been done in the past. I think you made a really good point that a lot of these folks that are in USDOT and a lot of the departments are still trying to find their way through the department because, you know, folks that have been there for 30 years got cleaned out 2 years ago. Good, bad, or indifferent, lots of people left. So the good thing is Secretary Chow, this is not her first job in Washington, D.C. She was the former labor secretary. She gets it. I think she's a very smart and competent individual, and I believe that she'll make the right decisions, whatever those decisions are, because she understands transportation, and I think she's a good selection for that position. I don't envy the job that she has, because she has very little money and lots of projects that she has to put out there. The things that you all have done, you are not the only ones in the country doing it. Everyone that has put in an application has called their member of Congress, they've called their senator, they've called their military installations. You're doing all the things that they are doing as well. You maybe touch a few different touch points than some of those communities. So let's say Minneapolis may not have the customs and border issues that you have, but Seattle does, right? Portland, Oregon maybe doesn't, but they have a logistics issue. So there's lots of different things that go into how these grants are evaluated and who's evaluating them. I wouldn't be quiet.
So whose voice moves the needle the most then?
With the staff, again, I don't know this staff. In the past, the first layer of review is just technical staff. They look at how the grant was written, what's in there, how much money was requested, et cetera. They have a certain set of criteria that they go through. It's then the next levels of where certain decisions are made. Some of them are political. Some of them are who's got a tough reelection. Some of them have, it just depends upon who's making the most noise and who's making the most phone calls. Again, I honestly don't, in my opinion, I think Riverside County should get $200 million because you deserve it, and you've got the most problems. If I were sitting there making a decision, I would look at all of the grant applications from this region. It'd be a no-brainer for me. But I spent a lot of time here. So there is a multi-pronged approach to this. I don't know who's on the selection committee. That is a very quiet conversation inside the DOT. But I would say what you're doing is what your competition is doing, and you should just keep doing what Dallas is doing, and Houston, and Boston, and everybody else. Probably not the right answer you're looking for, but it's political, it's technical, and then how much money they have to hand out, and then who is making the phone calls.
All right. Aaron?
Councilman, just to add a couple things. You're right. Congressman Calvert does appear to be a very strong champion for the infra grant. We were encouraged by our visit with him. We also made stops in Hunter's office, Harris, and then, of course, DOT. But I think it's important to note that when we were in D.C., we weren't advocating on behalf of the city of Temecula. We made it very clear we flew all the way there for Southern California. And that was a very important point when we were sitting across the table with folks that didn't necessarily know where Temecula was on the map. This is a Southern California problem, and so we used your names. We appreciated this task force, your letters, your phone calls. If you have lobbyists, talk to me. We want you to, get behind this effort. And by the way, as I understand the balance of the infra grant process, when we were there, the staff is right in the thick of whittling these down as we sit here today. And it's expected they're going to shortlist these applications next month with a stack going to the Secretary's desk in August, rendering a decision, a national decision. So, again, we check a lot of these boxes. We know we're in tight competition. And I think we have a 1 minute, 40-second video, if you'll indulge us. We'll cue it up. But this was an effort on our behalf for Southern California to take the letters off the page of our application, put it into a video when we stepped into a room in DC and said, please watch this. This is what we're here to talk about. So if we could run that real quick.
For those of you sitting at the dais, there's a couple of buttons on your station. You hit video and you'll be able to watch it on the screen in front of you.
So this was just a tool we used to sort of kickstart that conversation. And I think, Pat, you also have a visual to show phase 2 scope, which may be appropriate if we could share that now.
I will tell you that made quite an impression, the video. Really did. And then, of course, they also recognize that we're from Southern California, so they kind of threw in the whole Hollywood thing, and they're like, of course Southern California came into our offices with a movie, So, but either way, it does. It made quite the impression.
The video had the graphic that's up there on your screen now, but this shows what we've applied for this latest round of the infra grant.
and we're calling it the I-15 French Valley Phase 2 project. And what you can see on the map there is the Phase 1 project was to construct the southbound off-ramp. That's the lines in red, and the improvements on the southbound side of the freeway to Winchester. The Phase 2 project, which is what this application is to fund, is the blue lines on the map. And that basically adds 2 lanes to the 15 freeway from Winchester Road to the 215. So we're adding lanes to the 15 freeway is essentially what this Phase 2 project is. So it adds those lanes, and it also includes a flyover bridge so that the traffic getting on the freeway at Winchester has a direct connection to the 15 rather than having to merge through the traffic that's trying to get over onto the 215. So we believe this is a significant project that will improve the northbound traffic. It eliminates that weaving movement of the traffic trying to get over to the 215 and on the 215 will make a major improvement to the northbound side of the freeway. The total cost to complete this portion of the Phase 2 project, our latest cost estimate is about $110 million. We have approximately $60 million of that already programmed and available for this, which would leave us the $50 million that this application for the infra grant is intended to fund. So this just wanted to let you know that, like I said, this is really adding lanes to the 15 freeway. I mean, we refer to it as the French Valley project, but it's really more of an improvement to the I-15 freeway. So just wanted to make that clear to everybody. We hope we're successful with this application, but we have also been talking with RCTC about some other possible funding options if this is not successful. So.
All right. Any questions? All right. Well, let's keep our fingers crossed on that, and then we're going to continue looking for other strategic opportunities to continue reaching out to members or staff or the secretary or others as they come up, and we'll be out there on a moment's notice if we can, and then again, Tom, just think in the back of your head, like whose voice, moves the needle the most on this. And I'm not going to commit our city manager to this, but, I'm willing to fly out whoever we need to, and jokingly, I said this earlier. I mean, if this ultimately becomes the, Purina Dog Food Memorial Highway because they write the check, I really don't care as long as it gets done. So, whoever's going out there, let's just get it done and make sure we have the strongest voice and they pay attention. All right. Let's see, what else? I-15 improvements. So this is going on to the projects that we're starting with Caltrans. So, Pat?
Yes, the first item on your agenda, we've been working with Caltrans about constructing what are called auxiliary lanes in between the interchanges on the 15. So in between each of the interchanges, adding a lane for traffic that's entering the freeway to be able to continue and then exit the freeway at the next ramp. And the representatives here from Caltrans will talk about the Caltrans part of that project, which is really the larger part of the overall auxiliary lane project. The city of Temecula has taken the lead role in constructing one of those segments. So we've taken the lead role in constructing the auxiliary lane from Temecula Parkway to Rancho California Road going north. And I'm going to ask Avlan Oviar from the Public Works Department here to give you an update on the status of that project.
May I? Just before you start, Avlan, I just want to thank everybody here, because when we started the effort of this group, we don't know where we were going or what we were hoping to accomplish. It was sort of, let's just get the canoe in the water and see what's downstream. But having done that, I just want to thank everybody, especially Caltrans, because we came up with some solutions, all of us together. So I thought I just would want to remind everybody of that.
You're absolutely right, Mike. So I'm going to talk about, first of all, my name's Avlan. I'm with the City of Temecula. I'm a project manager in the Department of Public Works. I'm managing one of the segments. As Pat said, it's northbound 15 between Temecula Parkway and Rancho California Road. You're absolutely right, Mike. In a short period of time, we've already got commitments from Caltrans for funding and cooperation on development of projects, not just this segment, but the segments that they're going to talk about. But just as an update, earlier this year, we did get in writing from our partners at Caltrans funding commitment of $1.25 million in SHOP funds for this segment, as well as a commitment that this project would follow under the SOP, or Streamlined Oversight project, which means it moves a little bit faster through the development process at Caltrans. With that confirmation, the city went ahead and amended our current CIP budget to add this project. Of course, we put in the 1.25 from Caltrans. We threw in about $700,000 over the next 2 years from the city's general fund to get this project moving. With the total project budget right now of about $5 million, we are showing about $3 million as unspecified. So somewhere between, while we're getting this project developed, we're certainly going to have to fill in that gap so we can get it to construction. In April, we went out and put an RFP for full design services for design, environmental, and right-of-way certification. In May, a selection panel consisting of City of Temecula and Caltrans folks identified Mark Thomas and Company as the most qualified candidate. This month, I will enter professional negotiations to firm up that scope and enter an agreement. Hopefully, in the July timeframe, we'll go to an award and begin work in earnest July, August. By estimates, we're looking at about a 12 to 18-month process to environmentally clear PSNE plans and right-of-way cert to get it ready to list for construction. I haven't looked too deeply into what it would take to construct, but I would estimate a year right around there to construct this project. I have the design cooperative agreement to enter in between the city and Caltrans, but other than that, that's where we stand. Any questions?
All right. Well, thank you. All right, now on to the Caltrans update. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. It's good to be in front of the task force again. Sorry, that loud. So my name is Tom Ainsworth. I am the Chief of Intelligent Transportation Systems for Caltrans District 8. I'm actually not the real member of the task force. My boss was the member, was the deputy, and he's missed every single meeting except one, and he's in Europe right now at the French Open. So, he said a while back, you take the rest of the way. So I'm just going to quickly go over, where we came from. The task force had asked us, Caltrans, to come up with some the operational issues that are happening within the corridor, and the segment being between the 215 interchange and the San Diego County line, basically. So we came up with a lot of different kind of solutions. But there was only certain ones we could fund through the SHOP, the State Highway Operational Protection Program, which Caltrans has control of. We could fund the operational improvements. So we narrowed down our list to a project, and in that project we basically had auxiliary lanes from Winchester to Rancho California Road in both directions, auxiliary lanes between Rancho California and Temecula, with exception for the one that the city took the lead on. And for those auxiliary lanes, you don't know, it's just a lane between the on and off ramp, and it makes it a lot easier to merge and for traffic to merge onto the freeway. We also are going to put in 2 dedicated off-ramp lanes at Rancho California Road so the traffic doesn't back onto the freeway and slow things down. And then we're going to do ramp metering and widen the ramps at Rancho California so we don't have those long platoons of vehicles coming on the freeway and slowing down traffic. You guys had a presentation by WRCOG, and they talked about how the freeway was not performing how it should. The throughput was not what we expected for an 8-lane freeway, right? So in 4 lanes, we should have about 8,000 vehicles per hour, and we're getting between 5,000 and 6,000. And the reason is you have so many people getting on the freeway and so many people getting off, and all of that merging was causing these operational issues. So with this project, we think we're going to solve, and French Valley, solve all those operational issues and at least get the throughput you should be getting through this section of freeway. With that, I'm going to hand it over to our project manager, Ahmad Makar. He's going to talk about specifics of the project.
Thank you, Tom. My name is Imad Makar. I'm the project manager on the shop project, which basically will take care of the 3 segments that is in the 2020 shop. In brief, the project is being programmed right now, pre-programmed. So the PID document, which we call the Project Initiation Report, in brief, PIR, is being circulated as of today or maximum tomorrow for district review. And that is the document that Caltrans used to program the project for the 2020 shop. So it is on target, and we have a deadline by the end of this month, end of June, to approve the document. And then it's going to take its lifetime for the shop cycle. I think we had discussions on the schedule before with the city. The PNED, which the project approval and environmental document, is proposed to be at the end of 2021. That's the environmental clearance of the project. And the expected document is going to be on ISCE, IS on the CEQA document, and CE on the NEPA clearance. The project will be ready to list in September of 2023. Of course, that is the initial schedule at this time. If we can accelerate, we will. But a lot of those major milestones are dictated by CTC approval and structured by the 2020 shop cycle. As far as cost, the project conservative cost estimate as today is almost $28 million. It's entirely funded by the SHOP program. The escalated cost in fiscal year 23-24 is a little above $35 million. That's only the construction capital. In addition to that, there will be the support costs, of course, for the design phase and right-of-way phase. Any questions?
And you mentioned you expect it to be fully funded by the shop. Can you draw some clarity, Aaron and Mr. McCarr, regarding matching funds that are needed, if any?
Yeah, it's my understanding through the SHOP program, total, all the aux lane projects proposed in this package or this suite, northbound and southbound, about $30 million, let's call it $30 million. That will be covered by Caltrans for the SHOP, through the SHOP program.
Right.
The first leg, which we talked about between Temecula Parkway and Rancho Cal, northbound, Caltrans has graciously put up $1.25 million. That's a $5 million total project cost for that leg. And so we will be, as a local agency, responsible for closing that gap with local funds.
Got it. Thank you.
That is correct. And the co-op agreement, as Evelyn mentioned, is being drafted at this point between the city and Caltrans to fund this 1.25 from the minor SHOP program. So that is going underway. And I'll be actually involved in that project with Evelyn as well for continuity.
Just quick follow-up. Do we have a deadline to come up with those funds?
I'm going to defer to Pat and Greg, but from a cash flow perspective, I'm going to venture to guess those funds would not necessarily be needed until maybe the latter part calendar year next year, because this city council did take the action it did last month and amending our capital improvement program. We put up the $600K with the 1.25, so we have enough to sort of not lose any time, but we will need to close that gap, mid to late next year from a cash flow perspective, probably.
Because I think it bears mentioning some cities have already came forward and have pledged what they could, and I think that bears mentioning. I know budgets are tight. It just is what it is, but any help is appreciated. And it goes with the spirit of what Mr. Skanke said, and that is starting to look at things regionally and all together. And I think we're all in it. So I just wanted to thank everybody.
Yeah, the cities have, at least at the CM level and the Public Works level, we've had ongoing conversations about just that, the principle aspect of participating in the sub-regional local projects. So those conversations are continuing as we speak.
And just to elaborate on the minor funds, they should be available after in the next fiscal year, which is beginning of July, pending approved co-op agreement between the city and Caltrans. Thank you.
All right. Well, that ends that. Anything else? Any other questions? No. All right. So before we get on to the next item, just scheduling a reminder that we'll be meeting as needed, and bring everybody together. We're trying to do this as efficiently as possible because we know getting here is not easy. We'll keep it as efficient as possible. But we appreciate everybody showing up, giving the update. Tom, it reminded me, I made a note after our meeting in DC, Aaron and I, when we met with the Department of Transportation, the first thing they said, which was, a bit, disappointing, I guess, to me. First thing they said was, well, have you heard about our loan program, right? And we're like, well, happy to chat about that later, but we're here to talk about the grant. On our several hours sitting on the tarmac because Aaron adjusted his air vent and delayed the plane and had an engine fault. I was thinking about that. The loan program itself has there ever been a loan to grant process? So what I mean is, and I'm taking this in the context, and Pat, you probably have the numbers here, but over the last several years, as we've been trying to obtain the funding for this project, the construction costs go up, incrementally every year to the point where if we don't get funded soon, eventually the costs of the project just surpass what we're able to, obtain in a reasonable grant and be competitive, right? And so every year we're falling a little bit, farther behind on this. And so I was curious, has anybody ever contemplated a loan to grant program where, you bite the bullet and you take out a loan, but there are agreements in place that recognize that, you'll continue applying for those grants. What I'd hate to see is you do that and then they say, well, you've already got your money and, we're going to forget about you. So you fall off their radar. But, is there a way to basically fix those costs today, create a mechanism for paying that loan, but anticipate that in a certain period of time, you'd be able to cobble together whatever source of fund to pay that off, so that ultimately the project just doesn't become out of reach.
Which loan program were they referring to? TIFIA? Yeah. So TIFIA is one of the greatest programs that's ever been created. The challenge is you have to have the revenue to pay for it. And I'm not aware, I will do some research for you and get you an answer. I am not aware if there's been a loan to grant ever done. The point you made, which is once you get the loan, then you go in for a grant, they're kind of like, well, wait a minute, you got your loan, so don't come back and see us a second time for the same project. But unless you can, so the 91 corridor has a TIFIA loan, right? There's lots of TIFIAs in California. You have to have a revenue stream to pay for that. TIFIA is just as competitive as Tiger was and Infra is. It is a very competitive process, and there's a very small pocket of money that goes into TIFIA. The TIFIA committee is even more challenging than the Infra grant process. Now, DOT loves TIFIA. It's a great program. I am a big supporter of TIFIA. But I would walk cautiously down that road, primarily because if you cannot prove out the financing and the funding and then the revenues to pay for it, you'll put a lot of money into a TIFIA loan request and not get it. And it's also, as I said, very competitive.
Tom, is it fair to assume, like in California and either RCTC or the folks that have taken advantage of TIFIA loans, their backstop for revenue is HOV or managed lane revenue? Is that what they typically pledge to pay back the loan as part of a large infrastructure?
Yeah, so there's lots of different ways, so I will use the T word. There's shadow tolls, there are congestion pricing, there is all of the mechanisms that are used. You can also use future revenues that you're going to be getting to secure the loan. We did a TIFIA loan on the retrack project up in Reno. It was one of the first TIFIA loans that DOT had done in the state of Nevada. And the process was such a challenge for us. And getting the financials and the repayment schedule down to where they were comfortable with the loan, that was a challenge. But Aaron, to your point, you've got to have that revenue stream, and primarily that's what the large metros use for the revenue stream.
But tolls can be used as that revenue stream, or proposed tolls, right?
Yeah, or a shadow toll, or
Yeah.
a toll, or any type of congestion pricing, et cetera.
Thanks, I appreciate it. I just noodled that around because I'm wondering if, and that's the one thing we always hear from our lobbyist is the feds are always willing to fund a pilot program, right? They like those a lot more than a lot of their regular programs, and somehow they always find money for pilot programs. So, I mean, if we come up with, some other solution, I mean, and especially if, and God forbid we're not successful this round, but just saying, fixing in those prices, it seems to become more and more urgent, and whatever we could do to create some mechanism to do that, I think we should try and explore.
A couple of, just to add to that, this is a fact that most people don't know, and if the public knew, there would probably be a revolution. So I'm going to bring it up, and hopefully we'll start one. But, okay, that was funny. It's late in the day. Anyway, so the two people that laughed were paying attention. So when you add $1 federal to a transportation project in the United States, you add 10 to 12 years to the project delivery process. So from the day Caltrans or RCTC or you all say, we're going to start a project, the clock starts ticking. And there are so many duplicated processes inside of the processes that, and it's not just NEPA. CEQA is a challenge you all deal with in California, but it's not just NEPA and CEQA. It is the project delivery process. When I was on the National Surface Transportation Committee for those 3 years, I worked for 3 years with my colleagues to shave time off. We actually got some of that time shaved off in MAP 21. But still, it's 7 to 8 years as opposed to 10 to 12 years. The state of Utah, as an example, does not use any federal money on any of their highways. They use all of their federal money for maintenance, and they use all of their local money and state money for highways, because they don't want to slow up the process. So as you start planning, to your point, that the project starts getting so expensive, you have to continue to update the environmental, right, and keep that current, or if you get behind on that, heaven forbid, you have to continuously upgrade the project design, right, because when you start, traffic counts were 40,000, now they're 40 million, 12 years later, and you can't plan for that. So thinking outside of that proverbial box of can you do a loan to grant, I think it's worth looking into. You're right, DOT loves demonstration projects, and they love pilot programs. I'm not familiar of any pilot program or demonstration project around funding because there's so few dollars to go around. I mean, candidly, what has to happen is they have to find more revenue. And there's just no one willing to have that conversation. It's not an easy conversation, but somehow more money has to get in there so that you all don't have to wait and go through this process. But keep in mind that the project delivery process is 10 to 12 years. If you want to build a transit line, light rail, whatever, it's 15 to 18 years. And that's supposed to, transit's supposed to reduce emissions and be environmentally responsible, and the process is even longer. So that's part of that strategy, right, which is how can you move projects faster and how can you do those workarounds? So I will look into whether that's ever been done. I am not familiar with that off the top of my head, but I will look into it and get Aaron and Greg and everybody an answer to that.
All right. And on that positive note, I think we're probably going to try and dump you all onto the freeway at peak times. So unless anybody else has anything to say, we'll be in touch. And again, thank you all for all of your support on this. Yeah, Jared.
Sorry, forgive my ignorance on this. I'm trying to figure out, so we talked about the technical aspects, Tom, and I appreciate that. And this is seems like this group is growing in its ability to collectively work and have that single voice. Is there any validity or weight? We're talking about pressure, we're talking about the squeaky wheel, how to get noticed, citizen campaigns. Is there anything outside of just these technical aspects in which you can engage with the citizens in the collective region, some kind of campaign that would put further pressure on? Have you seen that in other cities or regions?
I have, and they are successful. They need to be coordinated, and you have to inform the right players. USDOT is likely not going to succumb to any type of public outcry because they don't have a switchboard to take that. And I'm not certain that public outcry to the Secretary's office or DOT is strategically smart. But you all hear from constituents every day. That's the best and the worst part, in my opinion. I'm not an elected official, but that's the best and the worst part about being in local government, right? All politics are local, and local city councils and mayors hear from their constituents every day. People in Washington, D.C. don't primarily on local issues because they're national issues. So, look, your congressman has heard you, and I know that because I've known Congressman Calvert, like I said earlier, 18, 19 years, and he listens. And the best thing to do there is keep him informed of any changes and keep him informed of the importance of the project. He knows it, but if you have a relationship and haven't talked to him in the last 3 months, he'd probably appreciate a phone call. I don't think getting 800,000 people in the region to call him is probably a wise strategic move. But it's important to keep your member of Congress informed. And those grassroots campaigns have to be, well organized and well thought out.
Yeah, I think I was envisioning more of something like social media campaigns or something like that, not necessarily calling direct, but trying to think outside the box, something that would bring everyone collectively together and then hopefully have, a lot of manpower there.
If I could mention along those lines, and I know Mayor Nagar's on the RCTC ad hoc committee to look at regional priorities and a long-range transportation plan for Riverside County, and RCTC does have a program underway now called Reboot My Commute. So they are taking input from all the different communities throughout the region on what they think the highest priorities for Riverside County are. Of course, our input has been, we think this project and these projects on the 15 corridor should be rated as high priorities as far as future long-range planning for RCTC. So there is that opportunity to provide input to RCTC that way.
All right. Yes, Bob.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate greatly all the information that we received here today and the update, but I just want to take a moment to remind everyone that our mission statement includes the I-15 all the way to Cajalco, and I would appreciate at the next meeting if we have an information update on the activity that's taken place between Cajalco and the city of Murrieta. As RCTC commissioners, last month we approved $29 million to begin the environmental review process, and that is significant. It's significant for a couple reasons. We do have the money and we have started the process, but it's also, in my opinion, kind of a waste of money. I believe that if our constituents knew we were spending $29 million in 5 years to
evaluate the environmental impacts of the dirt strip medium between my community and the city of Corona, I think they would probably come unglued. Mr. Skanke talked about the federal shield and how important that is, and that gives us status and ranking. I think that at the next meeting, we need to have a discussion about the trade-offs of compliance with NEPA and CEQA and the commitment that this county made through the Multi-Species Habitat Conservation Plan. That is now 15 years old. We have secured and set aside over 60,000 acres, some jurisdictions more than others. And I believe it's time that we started reaping the benefits of that, because our state and federal partners made promises. And I think we need to begin to hold them accountable to keep those promises. The promises were that infrastructure would be easier and quicker to get through the process. And so I think we need an update from our state and federal partners on that, and them coming to the table, because we all have. And I think we also need to take a look at what benefits we could gain from Councilman Calvert's latest proposal. I think that that has an opportunity to really give us some teeth here. And then my last comment is, 18 months ago when we started, I talked about the Trump card, and we seem to have never brought that up again. And if somebody wants to put me in the corner and pat me on the head and tell me why I shouldn't bring that up anymore, I'm happy to listen. But I think with this president, we still have an unusual opportunity where an executive order might actually help us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All good points, Bob. Thank you. Yeah, Mike.
Thanks. I want to comment a little bit on what Bob said. I always want this board to be, actually all of our councils to be doers, not just talkers, and I get the impression that we are. If there's virtue in sending a letter to the President of the United States, let's just make the decision and do it, okay? And if everybody feels that way, let's do it. That's number one, let's just do it. So does anybody have any heartburn? Aaron, do you see any downside in doing that? Mr. Skanke, I mean, are we cross purposes with DOT? Let's talk about it.
Well, so nobody's chiming in. I'll jump in real quick and say, no, look, Bob, I agree 100%, and I think we all said that, a while ago, that was, absolutely an important, potential strategy. How that affects the grant process, I don't know, and how that, plays as far as the secretary goes, I don't know. But, maybe the first thing we do is, talk to our lobbyists and talk to those in the know, and Tom, we can get you digging into that a little bit too, and see, the optics of doing something like that. Does it help or hurt? Because don't forget, at the same time we're doing that, we also have a different perspective from our governor's office. So, we'll want to make sure that we're balancing, the state and federal commitments here, and walking kind of a fine line. I mean, that's kind of where we are today. So, but I think it's worth taking a look at. And if we're going to do that, if we're going to, reach out to the the president's office, then I say we do the same thing to the governor's office. Nothing precludes us from doing that, but, we need to make sure we have the right message and tell the right story.
So, I guess you're chairman. Is going to call you Mr. Chairman. Okay. So let's, if I can encapsulate kind of what you said, it probably would be, I'm thinking it's wise to wait till after August and the infogrant stuff. Would you concur, Mr. McGee? I'm good with that. Okay. And then in the process while we're waiting, maybe we can do the inquiry as you suggested. Mr. Adams, does that sit well with you? And Mr. Skanke?
I think that's a fair approach.
Okay. All right. Real good. If I may continue. The second thing, and I think you just alluded to it, was the governor and the state. Bob, boy, I feel that pain because it's just complying with CEQA and NEPA, and Mr. Skanke just mentioned that, the faster we run, the more behind we get, and it just, you can't make any sense out of it. But maybe there's a connection, because I know right now, for a number of reasons, council-wise and in my professional capacity, the governor's on this fast track to produce some sort of housing. I mean, and in my opinion, they're going in all the wrong directions. But what I'm thinking here is if we can bypass some of these CEQA obligations, which we know the state legislature will do, we've seen them do it before, you can probably link that to housing in some respects. The land is here, this is where people are living, this is where they're moving, but in many ways, CEQA compliance is becoming more and more impossible because of the traffic issues. The state is now moving toward the AD, is it the ADT? Is that, okay, I pretty much, so the ADT, how far, not necessarily your local traffic, but they're going into, where's that traffic going? There might be something here. There might be a mechanism here to connect the dots so Governor Newsom could say, look, you want housing. The way to do it is you need to help us be able to comply and mitigate with CEQA, and right now it's just impossible. You add another lane onto the freeway, particularly in the area where you're talking about, and from Cajalco down to 74, and then even from 74 through this way all the way down to the line. Now we're moving traffic where people can live. It creates more buyers. Think about it for a second. It creates more supply. When there's more supply, everybody knows what's going to happen is prices will drop. There's a connection here somehow. I'd be interested in exploring it. My instinct tells me there's a connection. How to get there, whether a fiscal impact analysis associated with a traffic study that ends up quantifying that, there's X number of developable land that developers would build if they only could mitigate CEQA and NEPA issues, but they can't. That's kind of what I'm, and I don't know where to go from it, but I'm stimulating the thought.
Right. We've talked about this a lot. CEQA reform, it's high on everybody's list. Not quite sure where to tackle it, but we do know from history there's been a lot of major high-profile capital privately built projects in this state that have been exempted, either legislatively or otherwise, and that might be a place for us to start with our local legislators in terms of criteria that we could consider based on public safety needs or things of that nature. I don't know. Could make for a conversation.
So check this out. This is just in my own nugget here, come in just from this point. Let's say, what was the amount that we're spending just for 5 years for the environment? $29 million. Okay, so let's say we can get exempt from CEQA. I mean, just really minimize it, and if anything qualified, this does. There's no habitat, there's no impact, maybe air quality, but you're going to do the work anyway. Okay, so I hate to say it, and I don't mean it in a flippant way. Who cares what the air quality impact is? Okay, because all of the trucks and everything that's going to do the work have to meet the criteria anyway. So who cares? Okay, so think about this for a second. I know this is a stretch, but that's what we're here for. Maybe you start infrastructure financing districts, but you almost like a redevelopment redo, but you compel the county to have to comply. In other words, the county doesn't want to lose its increment revenue, okay? But you're looking for a revenue stream. Somehow you have to create it, and that's what redevelopment did, and that's how we did affordable housing, and it's not being done anymore. But you got to connect the dots, is what I'm saying. If you want to have more houses, you need to have more infrastructure. If you need more infrastructure, you got to finance it. In order to finance it, you need a revenue stream, and just there's a mechanism in here somewhere.
Well, or alternatively, you could use that $29 billion, cut a third of it out and put that toward affordable housing projects, and exempt the project. I mean, either way, you're saving, nearly $20 million and, getting two things done at the same time. So why couldn't you create a mechanism like that folks would, support?
Well, and you're exactly right. And you stimulated something a second ago when you were talking about loans, okay? And so to Mr. Skanke saying, look, is there any way you can get the federal government out of this? And then you can just cut the timeline right down. That's where I'm thinking an infrastructure financing district of sort. Trust me, I'm not in the weeds with it right now, but then you stimulated something. We need some sort of idea. I mean, there's somewhere to make the dots. If you need a revenue stream in order to get the loan, we just got to think creatively where that revenue stream's going to come from. And we don't really want to tax people. I mean, that's not really what we want to do. That's the old standby. But where can you get the money? And what are we talking about, you know, for these stretches of freeways and lanes? Where are we in, $200 million, something like that?
Which lanes are you talking
Just in general, just a ballpark for it all. 300 million?
about? The Ox Lane projects?
No,
or-
just in general, what we're trying to
If we
do.
were to fix this
Be
area through
yeah,
Lake
at least a
Elsinore and-
$500 million for our mission statement.
Okay.
Yeah, $500
All
million.
right. So let's just take that down a notch to, let's say, 200 million, just to play with the numbers for a second, okay? The ability to finance 200 million over the next 30, 35 years, when you break it down, is not as difficult a hurdle to climb as it appears, okay? To get a revenue stream that would finance that. We can do that. There's a way to do that. And I don't know what that is, but that's the mission. Among everything else we're working on, that's one thing. What can be created to secure the revenue stream, and then how to debt service it in some capacity. My quick idea was, you know, a financing district of some sort. You got to convince the people to do it, so they vote to let their properties be in it, but it's no tax increase for them, and you got to communicate that. But the county won't want to lose a revenue stream of increased taxes, so that come along just with inflation and all that. But so you know, I don't know how you do it. Maybe the state passes a law. Maybe the state sets up the district. You see what I'm saying? Maybe the state says, you know, by legislative rule, this area, from a county point of view, from county taxation, 2 miles on this side of the freeway, 2 miles on that side of the freeway for the stretch of, you know, 30 miles is now an IFD, and increment will go to finance freeway improvements. You bond against it, okay? There's your borrowing, there's your revenue stream.
So if I hear you correctly, in exchange for building some affordable housing and we become exempt from CEQA, we then establish an enterprise fund which would take the tax increment difference between what it was when it was vacant, what it is now. There's the revenue stream. The other part of that equation is we can't continue to take properties off the tax roll, which comes back to dedicating or giving up through mitigation these properties to Fish and Wildlife and Fish and Game, et cetera. We had a low-income housing project. I'm going to throw out a couple of numbers. 10 acres. Fish and Wildlife wanted 4 in mitigation. We killed it. And we're just now scratching our way back. The state government is working at cross purposes, and we need to shake them around. To your point, if the governor wants affordable housing and he wants to protect the environment, we need to establish a revenue stream.
And I'll just say one more thing to Tom's point earlier this afternoon was, if we're a donor state as far as, you know, California federal tax dollars, you know, my argument against all of this, and I don't want to throw a wet blanket, because I love the conversation, we have to figure it out, but, you know, 6 cities and a tribe are not here to subsidize the federal government, right? I mean, you know, I feel very strongly about that, because if we're donating so much money that other states are benefiting from what's collected in the state of California, you know, the other part of that solution is make sure that doesn't happen as much, because, you know, I'm sorry, but, you know, our taxpayer dollars, and regardless of what housing is built and what advantage we get, I still have, you know, a very difficult time assuming that the resources we have are here, you know, to help benefit, you know, a $1 trillion, you know, annual deficit. I mean, it just boggles my mind that you know, we would do that. And, you know, it's a responsibility I think we have to, you know, have the conversation, because in the long term, the quality of life, health and safety, public safety, you know, we need to absolutely come up with a solution to do this. But just bear in mind that, you know, I hope we all have a little consternation for being the, you know, the subsidy to the feds. Yeah.
You know, Dr. Ron, I got to tell you, I don't disagree with you at all. But like we said, that battle is years. You know, and you mentioned it. Every year we spent, it's going up and up to the point where you can't even get a grant to build it anymore. Case in point, we were ready to start this second phase of French Valley Parkway with was it SB1 funds? I always get the STIP and STIP monies, right? And we went out to bid to find out what it would cost, and it blew away what we were coming. I mean, we were working so hard, and you know, it was really tough because it was the ballot measure, and it was the gas tax, and we were saying, look, it's going to go toward road improvements, and lo and behold, it will, but we can't pay for it now. I also want to mention this out of the creativity, and again, not to get too much in the weeds. Right now, I'm doing a project in the Central Coast. The state has a piece of property in this city. It's about 80 acres. It's by an airport. They want to use it for affordable housing, but they cannot. The city there is convincing them to turn it over to the city instead of going out to bid. So the state gives the property to the city. Okay, the city can either sell it or give it to a developer who can sell it and trade it for a planning area or affordable housing in the city. The state can never pull that off, but the city can. And so you do this convenient exchange, and we were on the phone with the I don't know, the governor's aide, whatever you call him, and he wanted all of the pertinent information to take it to the horseshoe, is what apparently they call the governor's, you know, a table where, you know, hit them fast. You got 5 minutes, this, boom, 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 that's it. And they're listening to us because his goal right now is to produce units. And I think they're going about it the whole wrong way, but you got to fall in the line with how they want to do things, and it's in that creative way. So I don't know where we go with this discussion, and it may be worth having another meeting in the next, I don't know, month or 6 weeks, because there's some meaty stuff here.
Just a workshop, you know. I mean, you know, folks who want to participate.
Get your mic on there. What?
Yeah, maybe we just do a workshop one day. You know, the folks who are able to participate can, and you know, and we work with the, you know, to think outside that box and put things on the table that, you know, because what are we doing? We're waiting for a grant to land, right? I mean, and in the meantime, we shouldn't just be sitting on our hands. We should be coming up with, you know, plan B or C or D or whatever. So why not take this time over the summer to, you know, kind of get creative with other options, knowing that, you know, even if Tiger or, you know, any of these other funds come on board, we're still, you know, a ways out from being able to apply again anyway. So in the meantime, you know, keep our fingers crossed, keep advocating the way we are, but, you know, come up with some solutions, because this $50 million is just one part of, you know, like Bob said, I mean, that's only 10% of what we're looking at right now. So, you know, if we're going to chip away $50 million every 2 years, you know, it's going to take us a while to get to our goal. But you know, if we get a little bit more creative with it and see if we can accelerate this somehow, let's by all means.
Dr. Ron, if the group's amiable, I like the workshop idea. Also, if the group's amiable, maybe we contact the governor's office and say we have an idea to link infrastructure with affordable housing, get their attention. See if they'll send a rep down here for that workshop. And let's get that conversation started. I think they'll listen. I think the latest, all these numbers, I think they're trying, the number 45 stands out. I don't know if it was 45,000. I think it was 45,000. They're trying to get in the next year 45,000 affordable housing units. They're trying to do it in any fashion they can. I mean, in just whatever way they can. I think they're going about it the wrong way. They're creating a lot of legislation that makes things administratively approved, and you know, all of the things that really don't mean anything, because bottom line is there's not enough tax credits and there's not enough profit, and land costs are too high, and no matter how many administrative approvals you get, nobody's going to do that, because that's just a very small part of the whole process of developing a piece of property. So it's just not incentive enough. But if the group's amiable to that, let's alert. Yes, Aaron. Sorry.
Just real quick, I know, yeah. Folks, but to Councilman McGee's frustration, I think we have an example right in front of us. You stated that you will have to expend $29 million to study the environmental, to basically add capacity or operational improvements to Cajalco and that section of the 50 HOV.
lane, yeah.
We're going to spend about the same amount of money that we talked about tonight doing the physical improvements to the 15, which I'm sure, like Elsinore, Wildomar, Menifee would have otherwise put that $29 million to use, or the majority of that, into the physical construction of the lanes themselves. So, I mean, that's, I think, what I'm hearing is that's the story, that's our plight with Sacramento, is sort of, let's talk CEQA reform here, because this is backwards, so.
We're killing the trees to save the fish, and it just doesn't make sense.
Is the group amiable workshop, letter to the governor? And then, let me throw something else out there. Maybe we have our rep from Kaiser Marston here, because they can speak to financing mechanisms. And, I mean, again, we're starting from the ground up, but at least we'll have some information there. I also, we use David Tossig a lot, but here in Temecula, it's mostly Kaiser Marston and Paul Mara. But if the group's amiable, let's do that and start this process. We got these lanes thanks to Caltrans, and that was just because we pushed a boat in the river, you know. So let's push it again.
Sounds good. All right. Well, anything else? That was a great conversation. Thanks, Bob. Appreciate that. So now we're not dumping everybody out on peak time, so that's fantastic. I knew you were just killing time, so it'd be a little easier to drive home. No problem. All right. Well, with that, again, always appreciate everybody showing up. Let's keep the good work moving forward, and look forward to seeing you guys soon.